The Chicago Bears are all in on Caleb Williams, but it's important for us to evaluate him in the context of the rest of the quarterback draft class so we can better understand the players he's going to be compared against for the rest of his career.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on X at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on all of your favorite social media platforms, including the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On the show today, we will be joined by Derrik Klassen on Twitter at QBClass. He is a skill player scout for Bleacher Report's NFL Draft Project. He scouts all the quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and I think tight ends for them over there. And then he does quarterback charting for Reception Perception. So he spent a lot of time looking at this draft quarterback class as a whole, as an outsider, right? Not a Bears fan evaluating Caleb Williams or a Washington Commanders fan I did evaluating Jayden Daniels, but someone who just watches quarterbacks and watches them intently and can help us get a better understanding of, okay, how does Caleb Williams compare to Drake Maye and Jayden Daniels and Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy, etc., so we can get a better sense of what the Bears are getting and what the Bears are choosing over the rest of the class, so that as these quarterbacks go forward and we compare what Caleb Williams becomes to what Drake Maye becomes to what Jayden Daniels becomes, we know where they're all starting from and hopefully have a better sense of why the Bears are choosing Caleb Williams. I'll give you a quick spoiler alert with Derrik. He's a big fan of Drake Maye and has Caleb Williams and Drake Maye very neck and neck in this quarterback class. So we're going to get into the head-to-head comparison between them, but also focus most of our attention on Caleb since he's coming to the Chicago Bears. Joining us now on the Locked On Bears podcast is Derrik Klassen. He does quarterback scouting for Bleacher Report's NFL Draft Project, and he charts quarterbacks over at Reception Perception. We can see the route data for all the different routes quarterbacks are throwing to. The heat maps and charting is so helpful, and it's really been an important part of the quarterback evaluation process. So, Derrik, I really appreciate you joining us today. Let's start big picture with this quarterback class. Like, how do you compare the top of this group with, Caleb and Drake Maye and Jayden Daniels to some of the other recent quarterback classes we've seen? I mean, we saw three quarterbacks go top five last year, and then a couple years ago, 1, 2, 3. I mean, how do you sort of put these in that context?
It feels a little bit like the the Josh Allen class, where you had basically five guys who were kind of in that. It was like Baker, Rosen, Darnold, Lamar, Josh Allen. Obviously this class is really closer to four, probably, who are like in that, probably serious first round mix. You could kind of compare it to maybe like the Deshaun Watson draft, where you had also like Mitchell Trubisky, Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Kaiser, who was like potentially a first round pick, all that sort of jazz. So I think it's pretty in lockstep with those guys. What I would say is that Caleb and Drake specifically are some of the best that I've ever seen, like up there with Trevor Lawrence. I started doing this the year after Andrew Luck, so I don't really count him. But other than that, I mean, Drake and Caleb are basically in that tier to me. So that, I guess, kind of elevates this class a little bit above some of the others that I've scouted and stuff. In the same turn, I'm probably a little bit lower on Jayden Daniels and J.J. McCarthy than a lot of other people are. So that it makes it like kind of, I think I'm in a weirder like space with this draft class than other people, where I think the top is just absolutely completely stacked, insane, some of the best I've ever seen. And then the other guys are closer to me, like late first round, early second, maybe this can work type of guys.
Sure. I do want to get into the Caleb versus Drake head-to-head here, because I know you've written a lot about that, and that'll be an important part of this conversation. But I want to start first with Caleb Williams specifically. Like, how do you pin down a player like that who does like so much stuff out of structure, but then like in structure, it's a lot of just like RPOs and kind of the ball fake play action stuff. Like, how do you start to pin down a quarterback like that can do some special things, but then also you haven't necessarily seen him do a lot of the kind of like translatable to the NFL in structure type stuff?
Watching Caleb on film was actually a really interesting experience for me because you obviously everybody goes in thinking, oh, he does all the off script stuff. It's a really kind of a BS offense, all that other stuff. Especially this year, I think Lincoln probably had his worst year as a play caller, which I think you definitely saw affected the offense overall. But by the time I got done watching and charting Caleb Williams, I was just like, I think he's really going to benefit from an actual NFL system where he has like structure that he can play within. Because I feel like there were plenty of moments on his tape, when they actually did call real drop back stuff where he can go 1 to 2 to 3. He can play with his eyes up in the pocket, move around a little bit, get to the backside. Like he showed that he could do it. The offense was just so out of sorts all the time, especially up front, that he just never really was able to get in a consistent rhythm with that sort of stuff. But I just came away by the end of it and I was like, man, I just wish he got to do more. And it wasn't like, I thought he couldn't do it. It was just like, man, I know he can do this. I wish he got to show it more. And I felt the same, I know we're not doing Drake right now, but I felt the same with Drake Maye. And I think that to me, that's why I think they're special prospects, is that at the end of it, I watched them because there's some of these other prospects like Bo Nix, where like I watched what he did in their, very college-esque offense. And I don't think to myself, man, I wish he got to do more. To me, it was just like, well, he's going to have to learn a lot in the NFL and it's going to be a big learning curve. When I watch Caleb, it's just like, nah, I'm pretty sure he can do it. I just need to, see what it's going to look like in the NFL. But I feel very good about, I think, where he's at. I think the last thing I'll say about that is just when you go into watching him, like I said, you really think he's going to be this crazy runaround guy. So many of the instances where he does run around and he's holding the ball for 8 seconds are really more out of necessity than anything. And I think the other thing on top of that is like when he's outside the pocket, he's not looking to run. He's looking to make throws down the field, and he does a pretty dang good job of it. So I wasn't really as worried about, the holding the ball, the pressure to sack, all that jazz with him, just in the context of like how bad that offense was and how much was on his shoulders every single snap.
This episode of Locked On Bears is sponsored by BetterHelp. BetterHelp provides online therapy that's here to help you be your best self. Online therapy is a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and I cannot recommend it to you enough. I like to compare going to therapy to going to the gym. Right? I go to the gym because I want my body to be strong, not because my body's broken, but just because I want it to be its best. And therapy is the same way. I don't go to therapy because my brain is broken, but because I want my mental health to be strong. And that's where BetterHelp can make all the difference. If you've been thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, and it's designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire, and then they'll match you with a licensed therapist. And if that therapist is just not quite the right fit for you, that's okay. You can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. Yeah, I know he gets a lot of probably unrealistic comparisons to Patrick Mahomes, but I'm curious, like, as far as like the evaluation side goes, like I remember in the Mahomes draft, there was a feeling like Mahomes was kind of like all or nothing, right? He's either going to be something that figures it out and is great, or he's going to be this reckless quarterback who holds onto the ball too long and is a disaster bust waiting to happen. And I don't feel like Caleb has, because he's not that same style of aggressive and doing a little bit of the craziness. Like it doesn't feel like the same type of bust potential there, but where do you set the floor then for someone like Caleb? Like obviously any quarterback can bust, but like Patrick Mahomes felt like more volatile on like the range of outcomes, and maybe Caleb's is a little bit more narrow, but I don't know. How do you sort of see that?
I don't know if I have like a direct player comp for whatever my floor is for Caleb, but like I would be pretty shocked if he's anything worse ever than like quarterback 20, where, he's not good, but he can at least do something for you. And there's a way to put offense around him. I mean, I do think if he fails, it's going to be, he never learns to get rid of the ball, which again, I think at USC it was a necessity, but maybe he just never unlearns it in the NFL. And I think that's definitely something to think about. I think the other thing is he's not the most fluent middle of the field thrower, and that just kind of comes with the territory of being a little bit on the shorter end. I don't think he's bad at it. I just think he's not like up to the level that you see of like the truly elite quarterbacks right now, like the Justin Herberts. Dak Prescott is really, really good throwing the middle. Lamar Jackson's really good at throwing the middle. Like he's not quite up to that level. So I guess those would be the things that maybe hold him back from, or could potentially lead to him not being what we think he is. But I think I mostly agree with you that I don't really see that much of a bust potential, which is crazy because usually these runaround guys are like the big bust potential guys. But with Caleb, it's hard to see. He's so good at so many things.
What do you think is like? What do you think he needs early on in the NFL? Like when you're trying to adjust this quarterback from the college game to what he's going to be asked to do in the pros. Like, is it about sort of smoothing that over and still giving him a lot of RPOs and stuff early on, or do you want to just say let's get as much structure around him as possible and really kind of mold him into our structure as opposed to kind of like softening the landing there?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think with just how quick his release is, like it would be foolish to not put RPOs into the offense. I mean, I hate watching them, but like when you have a quick release like that, when you're like Tua Tagovailoa, it's valuable when you can just get it out, when you can get the ball out that quickly. And I think he generally read them really, really well at USC. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. I really think with Caleb, I don't think, some prospects you're like, oh, he really needs a big X receiver or he really needs, good offensive line play, blah, blah, blah. With Caleb, I don't really think it's any like personnel stuff. I really think it is just kind of like I said, he needs an offense that is going to be very structured and say, hey, this is how we do 1 to 2 to 3. This isn't there. It's okay to check down. Like at USC, he didn't check down. He was just like, he was always down 14 points. So he had to go make a play. I think in the NFL, it's going to be like, hey, man, these games are slower. We have a good defense, assuming he goes to Chicago, obviously. You can play a little bit of a slower game. You can play within yourself a little bit. Like you don't have to be Superman every play. I think coaching that into him and like getting him to understand that and not like, neutering him and being like, never go make a play, but just getting him to understand like, hey, the game is a little bit slower here and that's okay.
How do we set realistic expectations for him and Drake Maye really when Caleb gets the Patrick Mahomes comparison and Drake Maye gets to be Justin Herbert, and now all of a sudden, if they're not Mahomes and Herbert, it feels like they're going to be disappointment at this point. So like, where do we kind of land that plane somewhere where it's a little bit more like still high expectations for great quarterbacks, but not like unrealistic expectations?
I mean, I think for Caleb specifically, it's like Kyler Murray. Like, I think he can and will be better than Kyler probably. But like, if he's Kyler, you should be pretty happy about that. Like Kyler at his best has played MVP football. I think he was a lot better last year than people really gave him credit for. I think he really adapted to their new offense, getting away from Cliff Kingsbury a little bit. I think that really, really went a long way for him, almost in the same line of like, hey, this offense is a little bit more structured and we're doing more pro style concepts than, they ever did under Cliff, which again, I think is what's going to help Caleb. So I think if he can be Kyler, I think that's a pretty reasonable and good thing for him to be. Like I said, I think Kyler to me is like, in that 9 to 12 quarterback range, and then at his best is a little bit better than that. I think that's absolutely a quarterback you can go win, 13 games with and really contend in the NFC.
Yeah, I feel like people hear Kyler Murray as the comp there, and like, and maybe I'm just projecting, but like, I feel like there's this perception of, well, Kyler, because he's been hurt the last couple of years, and the production hasn't really been there, and the Cardinals have just been bad. They're just not a great franchise. It's like, oh, like this number 1 overall pick quarterback that's we thought could be Patrick Mahomes, it's like just going to be Kyler Murray. But I don't know, do you think the NFL is collectively underrating Kyler Murray right now? Not the NFL, but I guess the media on the outside is collectively underrating Kyler Murray because of the last couple of years. Like, is that like that should be a good quarterback? Like that should be a dream. I mean, he's the number 1 overall pick too.
Yeah, I think 100%. I mean, like you said, if Kyler was on a good team, on a good organization, I don't think there would be any question that he's like what he was billed to be as the first overall pick. I think obviously, the injuries got in the way a little bit. And then I think the team the last couple of years, not this year, but the year before, Kyler was obviously probably his worst year as a pro. But that to me was a lot of like, all right, the Cliff thing has run its course. The offense is really bad. The receiver core is built out of guys who are like 5'8", which is just completely untenable to me. So to like, I mean, just for example, like if Kyler was playing on what the Bears are going to be next year, that team wins like 12 or 13 games and they win the division. Like that's the type of quarterback that I think he is. It's just that this Arizona team has only really ever been that in like, what was it, like 2020 when he had that like little MVP run? Like that's really the only time they've had a team good enough around him to let him like fully reach that potential. And he's been healthy, at least for the first half or so of the season. So yeah, I think if he was just healthy and didn't have a wide receiver core built out of Smurfs, there would be just absolutely zero question that he's as good as we hoped he would be.
This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at Gametime, the best way to get tickets for all of your favorite live events. Whether it's sports, concerts, comedy shows, live theater, you name it, they have it all at Gametime. I use it all the time. It is my number one choice for getting tickets. I actually just bought tickets to see Jay Leno and Arsenio Hall perform together this weekend. It's going to be a really great show. I'm excited to see it. And my ticket buying experience was so great on Gametime because not only can I see the view from my seats, so I know exactly what I'm going to be getting with my ticket, but they've got all-in pricing as well. So there aren't any surprise fees added at the end that make my tickets more expensive than I thought I would. And I usually end up saving money buying my tickets through Gametime and not spending nearly as much as the fees added on with the regular ticket purchasing provider. So it's great. I can't recommend it enough. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem our code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. I want to get into Drake Maye as a comparison for Caleb Williams now, because I think it's an interesting talking point, and also I think it applies good context when we think about these quarterbacks moving forward. I know I've read a lot of your evaluations on both of them, and I know you had an article at Bleacher Report last month kind of putting them head to head. And so rather than have me spoil what the answer is, Derek, gun to your head, you got to pick Derek Maye, or just you got to pick Caleb Williams or Drake Maye. Where are you going?
I would take Drake. And I know this is going to upset Bears fans. I swear it has nothing to do with Caleb. Like I'm pretty sure I like Caleb just as much as everyone else. It's just that I also really, really like Drake Maye. Like that's all that this is. I don't really think anything less of Caleb. It's just, yeah, Drake to me, the starting point of it is just like, look at all of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, whether it's Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Justin Herbert, just the way that they're built physically and athletically. Drake is a lot closer to those guys than Caleb is. Obviously, Caleb also has the same arm talent those guys have, but just athletically, the way that Drake plays, just how big he is, he's closer to that. And I think that's a really good starting point when you're, trying to fight fire with fire, especially in the AFC with those quarterbacks. And then the other thing that I really appreciate about Drake, and again, Caleb has this too, is his pocket management is just phenomenal. The way that I think he can throw with bodies in the pocket, the way that he can get to different arm angles, the way that he is just completely fearless when he knows that there's a free rusher. And buddy, let me tell you, at North Carolina, there were a lot of them. And so I just think those two traits together, on top of some of his best throws. I know he is a little bit scattershot accuracy. I think that looks worse than it is because he throws so damn hard. And this was something I said about Justin Herbert. I said this about Lamar. Like guys that just throw straight line like that really hard, when they miss, it just looks so bad that it feels worse than it is, I think. But his peak throws are just unbelievable. And I think he can access parts of the field that really nobody else except for Caleb in this class can do. And so you just add all that together, and then he's got a lot of, everyone loves to say Caleb is this like, oh, he goes and creates, he does crazy stuff, all these arm angles. Dude, Drake has every bit of that. Like he is a complete madman, like Josh Allen mode, where he just throwing left-handed touchdowns, like throwing balls when he's like getting dragged to the dirt in the red zone. Like he's just kind of unhinged sometimes. Probably going to need to rein it back a little bit in the NFL, but I don't know, man. Like I'd rather have that guy than, Derek Carr.
Absolutely. So I'm curious, like, as these guys both go forward in their career, right? Obviously, I know they're very close in your mind of head to head, like you're kind of nitpicking 1A, 1B there, but obviously like supporting cast and where they go is going to be important. And presumably Caleb Williams to Chicago is a pretty good spot. Like does that, where does Drake Maye need to go to be able to put that kind of best foot forward? Like, can he do that in Washington? Can he do that in New England? Like, is that going to shape, like, when we look back 5 years from now on, okay, which quarterback should have gone one, which quarterback should have gone two? Like, I guess how much of an influence do you think that'll end up having?
I think if it's Washington specifically, it's going to be really hard because their offensive line is like 3 years away from being anything useful, which I think.
Isn't that what he's used to from North Carolina?
Yeah, I guess if anybody is battle hardened enough to put up with it, it's probably him. But I do still think that would be a pretty tough thing for him to have to deal with. And then I kind of just generally don't really trust their front office, coaching staff, all that stuff right now. So I think that would be a tough spot. New England, their roster is not good, but the offensive line is a little bit better. And I have a potentially just like irrational amount of faith in Gerard Mayo. Like I just kind of think that he's going to be able to get it together there. So I think New England would not be the worst, even though I think year one he would definitely be worse than Caleb because the Bears are pretty well situated. I think the ideal spot for Maye would obviously be Minnesota. I think just in terms of the way their offense works with Kevin O'Connell, they have really good tackle play with their two guys. They obviously have really good receiver play with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson whenever he's healthy. Like that is the team where I think, in the same way that I think everything can come together for Caleb in Chicago, I think everything could absolutely come together for Drake in Minnesota.
Why do you think, and I know you don't agree with this, but like, why do you think Jayden Daniels is getting so much, I think Adam Schefter just said today or yesterday, like that all the signs are pointing to Jayden Daniels to number 2 at Washington. Like, why do you think there's so much love and excitement for Jayden Daniels above Drake Maye?
I think it's a handful of things. I think one, you just start anytime a guy wins the Heisman, right? It's going to be like he kind of just gets a little bit of a bump, especially with how many explosive plays specifically that he was able to make. I think he like broke the record for explosive plays in a college football season. So it's like I totally get how people would want to buy into that. I think at least like 5% of it is like, yeah, man, Lamar Jackson just won an MVP. And who's the quarterback prospect who most looks like Lamar Jackson? It's Jayden Daniels. Personally, I don't believe he plays like Lamar at all. But when you look at guys who are just like a little bit on the skinnier side, really explosive athletes, really good runners, like Jayden does fit into that. And I do think on some level you would have to defend him the same way because of that. And so I think there's part of that. Jayden also is, I think, a little bit more like consistent in the way that he throws right now and a little bit more consistently accurate to every part of the field than Drake Maye is. Again, I think part of that is like, Drake Maye is playing in like World War I trenches behind this disgusting North Carolina offensive line. And Jayden Daniels gets to play behind probably 2 first-round tackles and throw to a bunch of first-round receivers and stuff. So I think it was easier for him to be clean. He's also just played a lot longer, right? Like Jayden Daniels has played for 5 seasons in a bunch of different offenses. Like he's just gotten time to work this stuff out, whereas that's just not as true of Drake. And so I think there's just like a little bit of this level of like Daniels's tape is a little bit cleaner because of the environment and because of his experience. And I think that's allowed people to see why it would work right away a little bit easier. And you add that on top of just like his rushing ability. I think that's what's pushing people over the edge. I have other concerns with Jayden that doesn't put him close to Drake Maye for me, but I do at least understand how people are getting there.
So would the nightmare scenario for Bears fans be that, okay, Caleb goes 1, Jayden goes 2, Minnesota trades up to 3 with New England and gets Drake Maye? Would you think of Drake Maye as being in it's okay to say this, a better situation to the Vikings at 3 than Caleb at 1? Like, how would you sort of see those guys head to head in their respective situations?
It's at least like tied, right? I mean, Minnesota's defense is obviously going to be, I think, a lot worse than Chicago's, and I think that part will be nice for Caleb. Obviously, I do think the Bears are pretty well situated. I mean, they have good tackle play, they have plenty of receivers, but man, like getting a quarterback like Drake with, I think to me the real decider is Kevin O'Connell. Like this is not even to say, I mean, I like Shane Waldron. Like he's not a bad coach. I think he was a good hire, but man, KOC is different, man. Like he's one of probably the 5 best play callers in the league. You give a guy like that, someone with the talent of Drake Maye, who can do all of the stuff I think that Kirk did last year, but then also like some of the Superman stuff you see from the best quarterbacks in the league. That's just a pretty terrifying thought. So yeah, if I was Bears fans, I would be imploring the Patriots to not trade that pick away.
Or at least trade it to somebody else. Let the Giants.
Yeah, or trade it to somebody else. Give it to Las Vegas or Denver. Let Sean Payton do what he wants to do. All that stuff.
Well, Derrik, it's been great. I really appreciate all of your analysis. Before we let you go, let everybody know what you're doing in terms of quarterback scouting at Bleacher Report and the charting you're doing with Matt Harmon over at Reception Perception.
Yeah, over at Bleacher Report, I do all of our skill player stuff. We actually just put together our meeting for our newest big board. I think it drops maybe Monday of next week, April 8th or something like that. So you guys can go look out for that. And then other than that, yeah, Reception Perception, we do. So I do like written profiles where you can see all the charts for all the guys. And then we do a little bit of video content. We also have a podcast. So you kind of get like you get you can run the gamut of different media that you want for however much you want to consume each of these quarterbacks. So yeah, you guys can go check all that stuff out. I think Michael Penix is the next one that we've got up on the docket. So
sweet. Well, again, you can follow him on X at QB Class. That's class with a K. He is Derrik Klassen. Derrik, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Thanks again to Derrik Klassen from Bleacher Report and Reception Perception for joining us on the podcast today. If you enjoyed our conversation, if you learned a little something, if you just like the quarterback talk, make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcast, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. We're going to have more Bears draft talk for you all week long. At some point, we're going to talk to our friends from Locked On USC about Caleb Williams. We were originally going to do that kind of this week, but then scheduling kind of became challenging for both of us. We had to postpone that. So that's going to be coming in the next week or so. We're going to talk to Matt Waldman from the rookie scouting portfolio next week as well. But a lot more Bears draft prospects to break down, different scenarios to get you ready for the draft day so that when we're just a couple weeks away now, when it all comes around, you will be ready for draft day. So keep making Locked On Bears your first listen each and every day. And in exchange, I promise to always make time for you to bear down.